One morning in the spring of 1982, a mother rushed to the reception desk at the Royal London Hospital in England, cradling her 6-week-old baby girl named Claire. Claire was her first and only child, and like a lot of first-time parents, the mother was very paranoid about her daughter's health. And so anytime there was a change in her behavior or her appearance changed, it was like this mom rushed to the doctor. And that morning, the mother had noticed something very unusual on her daughter's head. There were 2 raised white lines that made the shape of a plus sign. There was one line that ran from the nape of her neck all the way in back, all the way up her head to her forehead, and the other line was horizontal, and it went from behind one ear all the way to the other ear. Now, this mother had no idea what these lines were, what they meant, what caused them, and so as soon as she saw them, she scooped her kid up and she headed to the hospital. Now, in the past, every time this mother had brought Claire to the hospital, the visit always ended with, "Your child is just fine." But this time, when the receptionist saw Claire's head and saw those lines, she immediately said, "Those do not look normal." And so she handed the mother some paperwork and told her they would get Claire to a neurologist as soon as they could. 15 minutes later, the mother stood in an exam room and watched as the hospital's pediatric neurologist, Dr. Farhad Afshar, examined Claire's head. And after a moment, Dr. Afshar stepped back and he explained to the mother that these raised lines on her daughter's head were something known as bulging fontanelles. So when a baby is born, the bones of their skull are not actually fused together yet. And the thin gaps between these separate skull bones are called fontanelles. And Dr. Afshar told Claire's mom that when a baby's fontanelles begin to bulge like this, it's usually because the child's brain is so swollen that it's beginning to push the skull bones apart. Dr. Afshar told Claire's mom that she had made the right decision to bring her daughter to the hospital. But he was clear that a lot of things can cause a baby's brain to swell and potentially cause these bulging fontanelles, and so in order to figure out what was going on, they would need to order a CAT scan. Claire's mom felt uneasy, but she said okay, and so they did the CT scan, and then a few minutes later, Dr. Afshar came back into the room with the results. And with a grave expression on his face, he told Claire's mother that he had some terrible news. Her daughter had a brain tumor. Hearing this, Claire's mom felt like the entire world was crumbling all around her. She was terrified for her daughter, and she had a million questions. But before she could ask any of them, Dr. Afshar said, "There's something else." He said that normally brain tumors are made up of brain cells. But based on the CT scan, it looked like Claire's tumor inside of her brain was made partially of fat and partially of bone. Dr. Afshar said he had never seen anything like this and couldn't even begin to explain it. But the one thing he did know is that whatever this thing was, it had to come out of Claire. Leaving it inside of her head could at a minimum cause serious neurological damage, or at worst could even kill the child. So Dr. Afshar told Claire's mom that she only had really one option. Claire needed brain surgery. Even though the operation was very risky for a child as young as Claire was, it was the only way they could figure out what this mass actually was, and it was the only way to get it out. Soon after their conversation, Dr. Afshar was standing in the operating room with Claire sedated, laying face down on the table in front of him. Dr. Afshar made an incision across the back of Claire's head. Then he cut a rectangle into her skull, essentially creating a small door. He opened up that door to see the bottom of Claire's brain. He delicately moved the left and right hemispheres of Claire's brain slightly apart so he could reach the section where the tumor was. And that's when he got his first glimpse of this strange mass. He grabbed it with a pair of surgical tongs and gently tugged, and he was surprised at how easily it began to slide out. And slowly it came into the light. And when Dr. Afshar finally got a full look at what this thing was, he was so stunned he just froze, staring at this thing that seemed impossible. And so after setting this strange mass aside, Dr. Afshar closed her skull, stitched her head up, and then sent her to the pediatric ICU. Claire laid unconscious in a hospital bed with her mother by her side for weeks. Meanwhile, Dr. Afshar ordered a genetic test on the mass he had removed from Claire's brain. And it turned out Claire was not an only child like her mother thought. She was actually a twin. And the mass that Dr. Afshar had removed from Claire's brain was her twin sibling's fetus. Claire had an extremely rare condition called fetus in fetu. Fetus in fetu occurs in the very early stages of a twin pregnancy when cells don't divide properly and one fetus becomes enveloped by the other. The enveloping twin looks like a single baby, but they're actually born with their sibling's partially developed fetus still inside of their body. The fetus in Claire's head was 5.5 inches long. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, but its head hadn't formed yet. And Claire's case was extra rare because her twin's fetus was found inside of her skull. In all of global medical history, intracranial fetus in fetu had only ever been recorded 18 other times. And it was thought to be a fatal diagnosis because to this point, all the others who had it had died. But after 2 weeks in the ICU, Claire woke up. And a week after that, she was healthy enough to go back home. And by 18 months old, she had fully recovered and had no lingering neurological problems. As far as the medical literature suggests, Claire was the first person to ever survive having her own twin removed from her brain.